Is Stellar Blade worth playing? Absolutely. This is an excellent game and definitely one of the best games of the year, and probably one of the best PS5 exclusives. It has wonderful combat, great level design, magnificent visuals, and a majestic soundtrack. This game kind of came out of nowhere and is just kind of taking the gaming world by storm for a variety of different reasons. However, the story and the voice acting aren't great, and some other aspects of the game are done somewhat poorly as well, which we'll get into throughout the video. But enough glancing over everything, let's get into it. Plot, world, and lore. No spoilers. So for the plot of this game, we're playing as Eve, who is a human that's enhanced with robotics and is part of a group called the Angels, who were crafted from and live in the colony, which is a place outside of Earth you really don't see much or hear much about, for a while in the story at least. But during the intro, there's a bunch of command ships entering the orbit of Earth to descend when all of a sudden, a bunch of missiles from the Earth come flying at the command ships and start destroying them one by one. As the command ships are being destroyed, they're releasing drop pods that house some of these Angels. And of course the drop pods are trying to reach the surface of the Earth to complete their mission, which we'll find out what that is here in just a minute. However, the drop pods are getting lit up as well. But thankfully the pod that houses Eve makes it to Earth's surface, but it's definitely not unscathed. As her pod crash lands onto Earth, Eve's unable to open the door due to it being damaged, but thankfully her friend, or mentor maybe, Taki, rips the door open and pulls Eve out of the pod, and the two then head into the fray. From here the tutorial area begins. This is a pretty great intro and it does a wonderful job kind of setting the tone of the game right from the beginning, and from here the events of the tutorial take place, and then after this Eve is off to collect more alpha cores. What really makes this game interesting is the world and the lore, but unfortunately it's not done super well here. But for basics, there's basically a war with this new alien species known as the naytibas, and this is being waged on Earth, where at some point in the recent past the naytibas eventually bettered the humans and forced them off to retreat into the colony, which is basically that subdivision in space. So now the naytibas inhabit Earth. But as the war went on, humans were eventually enhanced with biomechanical technology in the colony to kind of make them like super soldiers basically, and from this our goal was kind of to return to Earth and take it from the naytibas. However, this was a whole event leaving from Earth to go into the colony, and during this event some of the humans on Earth were left there. So now there's kind of a divide between the humans up in space and the humans on Earth, where the humans on Earth resent the humans on space for leaving them there, and the humans up in space kind of look down on the humans on Earth because they're on the planet with the naytibas. And of course there's also a lingering question of where did the naytibas come from and what are they? This is all an interesting setup for sure. I think this world and lore is actually really great, but a lot of what I just explained is not told very well at all, at least not until the very end of the game, where you learn more about the colony in space and about the various different events that I just talked about and how it all went down and what's really going on. Also, a lot of the lore is in text that you find through collecting items and searching various different bodies. So what I just recently explained is literally from text logs that you find throughout the game, which I don't necessarily think's a bad thing for a game in particular. I think Elden Ring and all the From Software games do this really well, but here the story is really central and it's just not explained super well until the very end, kind of. And a lot of these lore dumps aren't particularly written well either, so it just kind of seems like relatively low quality. But speaking of writing, the writing in the story here is definitely the weakest part of the game, and I'll definitely hop into that more later on, specifically in the spoiler section. But in general, the world and lore here is really cool. Just some of the explanation of it is just done really poorly. But thankfully, that's the only major aspect of the game that's done poorly. Most other things in the game are done spectacularly. Speaking of that, non-combat gameplay and level design. So the main aspect of gameplay here is definitely going to be the combat. However, there's also a lot of other stuff that you do in between combat, and arguably you might do that more than you do the actual combat. So what is this non-combat gameplay? Well, in order to really talk about that, I kind of need to talk about the level design. So here in Stellar Blade, you have three main types of levels. The first type is a linear level, which is pretty much just a straight shot from point A to point B. However, there's definitely a ton of side tracks in these levels where you can find secrets or extra items or collectibles that are genuinely valuable, so that encourages you to go down them. So it's linear, but it's not linear at the same time. The other type of level is an open area level, and in these levels it's essentially exactly what it sounds like. However, here in Stellar Blade, the open areas have a lot of stuff to do in them, and there's a ton of secrets and hidden treasures and collectibles in these areas, and they're very rewarding to explore. The third type of level is a dungeon-like level, which is completely different from all the other levels, but it's also kind of linear at the same time. But the gameplay and atmosphere here is completely different from anything else in the game, and it's really pretty neat. The hub world, well, is just that, it's a hub world. However, it's a really good hub world. There's a ton of side content here and a bunch of different shops and secrets to uncover, and as the game goes on, there's additional content that's added to the hub world, so there's always a reason to come back to it. And I legit spent several hours here just kind of running around looking for these secrets or talking to various different NPCs to find out more about the lore or to get more side quests or whatever, and of course exploring the shops to get more collectibles. Okay, now for the gameplay in these various different levels. For the linear levels, it's pretty much just getting from point A to point B like I talked about, but there are some puzzles to solve between different levels, and of course there's the fighting. But for the puzzles specifically, there's a ton of different puzzles here in Stellar Blade, and they're all done pretty well. And really the variety in different puzzles here is actually pretty immense. For the open areas, it's essentially the same as the linear levels, but of course it's open so you can go wherever you want. Generally, there's a main destination that you have to go to in order to progress the game to the next main section, and you can go straight to it once you get into the open area. However, there's a large amount of side content in these open areas that you can get into before getting to the destination and spend hours upon hours in these areas. I often found myself exploring almost every inch of the open areas and trying to find all the secrets and collectibles, and I really enjoyed these sections of the game. And I thought that it was really nice that one of these areas is introduced to you so early on in the game. For the dungeon-like areas, the gameplay completely switches up. Now, I want to spoil it here, but overall it's really great. In general, I really love the level design, the puzzles, and the traversal through this game, especially in the open areas. The only thing I really didn't like is the platforming, and unfortunately this game does have a ton of it. A lot of the levels in the area have you jump or swing or even swim from one place to the next, and all of these movement mechanics just aren't done particularly well. They all feel clunky and kind of inaccurate, and there's this weird thing where the camera doesn't follow Eve as she aggressively moves forward, either through a jump or a dodge. And in battle it looks really cool, but it can throw you off pretty dramatically when performing these actions, so you essentially have to adapt to it in order to be effective at platforming and dodging. And again, it just feels really clunky and kind of half-baked. But speaking of dodging, combat. Combat in this game is excellent. It's a great combination of Dark Souls, Sekiro, and God of War, and even DMC. Specifically with the melee combat, it feels a lot like DMC, where you have the light and heavy attacks, and you have various different combos that you can perform with a variety of combos between those two, along with a ranged option that you get a little bit later on as well. These attacks and combos feel really smooth, and they're really fun to perform, and they add a lot of different options to tackle different enemies in just various different gameplay ways. The dodging, however, is kind of like the most recent God of War, but it's also a bit like Dark Souls 2. And what I mean by this is that initially the dodging is fairly limited and kind of clunky, which is kind of like God of War, but then after you acquire specific upgrades and whatnot, it becomes a lot more fluid and natural, more like Dark Souls. But even with these upgrades, which there are basically two types, one which makes dodging easier and one that gives you a double dodge, after you get them and you have this double dodge, once you dodge twice, it kind of goes back to that clunkiness of God of War. But still, it's not bad even then, and I kind of like it for the most part, but really why I like it is it kind of de-emphasizes dodging in general in favor of the parry system. Here in Stellar Blade, the parry system is kind of like Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, but it does feel a little bit different. It's not a bad different, but it's different enough to distinguish it from Sekiro's parry. In general, it's an excellent parry system. I really don't know how else to explain it, but the way that it works here is in order to parry enemies, you have to press the block button at the right time, which is basically right before they're about to land an attack. Otherwise, you can block it by just holding the same button that does the parry, but if you parry the attack, it'll deflect the attack, and you'll know that this will successfully have prompted based on an enemy specific animation that it does, which literally looks like the attack being reflected. And there's also a sound with it as well. Initially with the system, the timing of the parry system is fairly tight. However, with upgrades and whatnot, the parry system is much more forgiving and a little bit easier to execute. Still a bit of a challenge though. And the reason the parry system is important is because of the perfect parry. The perfect parrying depletes an enemy's stability meter every time you perform a perfect parry. Try saying that 5 times fast. The stability meter is underneath the enemy's health gauge and is indicated by yellow diamonds. And once all the diamonds are depleted, the enemy goes into an unbound state, which allows you to perform an execution type attack that deals a ton of damage to the enemy and also has an awesome animation with it as well. This is an excellent aspect of the combat. Another really great aspect of the combat are other types of special attacks that you can perform, which there are a ton. But in general, there's beta skills, burst skills, and blink and repulse retaliation attacks. Starting off with the beta skills, basically they're just kind of super moves that you can perform once you have enough beta energy. You get beta energy from parrying and dodging, and you'll get more of it from the perfect parry version of the 2 evasive maneuvers. The amount of energy that you have is displayed above your health, as 4 blue squares making up another big square. Each beta skill has a specific number of bigger squares that it needs in order to be executed. You start the game off with 1 beta skill, but you can unlock 3 more as you progress through the game, and each one has specific uses in combats, so they're all worth unlocking, and they all have their own upgrade tree, which makes them significantly more useful in combat, and really they're a standout. I really enjoyed the beta skills here, and I used them frequently in combat. The burst skills are obtainable later on in the game, and they're basically just a more powerful version of the beta skills, but they also fulfill a different role in the combat system than the beta skills. But like beta energy, you need burst energy in order to perform the burst skills. The burst energy is displayed above the beta energy, and it's almost identical in fashion to the beta energy, but it's red squares instead of blue squares. You gain this energy differently though. Again, for the beta energy, you gain it from parrying and dodging, but for the burst energy, you gain it from performing blink and repulse, which I'll explain here in just a minute. These are notably more rare instances, and they're slightly more difficult to perform, therefore getting more burst energy is significantly limited in comparison to the beta energy that you can get. So this kind of strikes a balance between the burst energy skills being more powerful than beta skills, because while they're more powerful, they're also harder to obtain. And in general, you cannot hold as much burst energy as you can beta energy at one specific time, so that further strikes the balance. And like beta skills, you also get 4 burst skills, where each one of them have their own specific specific use, which again is different from the beta skills, and they have their own upgrade tree that can further their usefulness in battle. So these definitely can be useful and I like them overall, but I have to say I like the beta skills a little bit better, but the burst skills are still great. Okay, now on to blink and repulse. When enemies are attacking you, they sometimes have a special attack that displays with various different flashes of color, along with a specific sound that indicates that a special attack is incoming. When this happens, you have a limited amount of time to perform an evasive action in order to avoid this powerful attack. If the color is yellow, then the attack is an unblockable attack, so basically you just have to dodge it or take the hit. However, if the color of the attack is blue, it's a blinkable attack. With these attacks, you can use blink, once you unlock it that is, where you can dodge forward into the enemy right before the attack's about to land, and you warp behind the enemy, and this sends you into a blink attack after that warp that damages the enemy and then stuns them as well, but only for a short period of time. But once the enemy's stunned, this allows you a significant amount of time to follow up with damage, which is also valuable. So the blink attack damages the enemy, it stuns them, and then you can follow up with more damage. Initially, the timing is pretty tight on this. However, after you get some upgrades on the skill tree, it becomes much more generous. They also add extra options for damage as well after you perform the blink attack. Blink here in Stellar Blade is super cool and I love the addition to the combat system. However, when an incoming attack flashes purple, this is a repulsable attack. Not sure if repulsable is a word, but we're going to roll with it. This is very similar to blink, but instead of dodging towards the enemy, you dodge directly away from the enemy. And what this does is Eve does a backflip kick, which puts the enemy into a down state and exposes a weak point on that enemy, which you can then follow up by shooting with the drone gun to do extra damage to the enemy. Just like the blink, I really like this mechanic, and I think that it adds a lot to the combat in the game overall. And I like how it's just not another version of blink, like it's something completely different, where it opens up that weak point and you use the gun to shoot it. Just really cool. But speaking of shooting, there's another form of dealing damage to enemies, and that of course is shooting them with the drone gun. With this, you have a limited amount of ammo and different types of ammo that switch up the usage of it and adds more versatility to the combat system, and overall it's pretty neat. You start off with the standard shells that are pretty weak, but they also have the highest ammunition capacity. You then get access to slugs, the stinger missiles, and a charge blast rail. The charge blast rail is the first one that you're going to unlock, and you unlock it through the drone upgrade tree, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and it's essentially just what it sounds like. It's a charge beam. But here how it works is you first have to charge up the drone and then unleash the blast rail. The charge time does take a while, but once you release it, you have an extended amount of time that the charge will fire for, and a straight beam that does a decent amount of damage over a longer period of time. Ammo with the charge rail is very limited, where you only have a 3-round capacity for it, and this I guess is to kind of balance the usage of it per se, basically meaning not to make it overpowered. However, the charges per round can be upgraded to a total of 3, which initially it's 1. It's a pretty significant upgrade, but it also means that you have to charge it for longer before you fire it, if you want to use all 3 charges, that is. The stinger missiles are up next, and they do what you think they would do based off their name. They lock onto enemies and track them once fired. You start off with a decent amount, I think it's about 18 or so, and you can lock them onto enemies for 2 specific rounds initially, meaning that 2 missiles will hit 1 enemy. So if you max out the lock-ons you can do in a single fire, you get 6 fires in total. However, like the other ammunition types, this one can also be upgraded to do more damage and get more missiles in total and have more lock-on amounts as well. And then finally, you have the slug ammo, which is basically just a shotgun. There's very few rounds to start off with, and like shotguns in other games, it really does poor damage at range, but when the enemy's right on top of you, it does a large chunk of damage. And just like the other ammo types, you can increase the ammo amount and the damage that it does through the upgrade system. The drone gun as a whole, I don't think is balanced particularly well for a few reasons. The main one being that I think it's pretty weak overall, and it's kind of difficult to aim at times too. It also takes a long time to pull up the gun, from basically having it holstered to pulling it up, and then with some ammo types it takes even longer to fire. It almost seems like there's a bit of delay. So outside of the repulse mechanic, which it does work very well for, I barely used it in combat. Yet you also have to use the gun for certain puzzles in the game, or other mechanics in the game in general that come later on, and for those I really enjoyed it. For healing, things get a little bit weird. One of the main healing items is the tumbler, which works almost exactly like flasks do in Dark Souls, or any other main healing item in Souls-like games. And like everything else here, you can further upgrade the efficiency of the tumblers and the amount that you have as you progress through the game. I initially thought that the amount of time required to use these items in combat and the healing system as a whole was pretty poorly designed. However, as I continued to play the game, I noticed that although the timing to heal feels long, it's really not that long, and it bounces really well into the combat system for a few reasons. So let me explain. The pure animation of using the tumbler is fairly long, but in reality, it's just the animation that's long. You as Eve are able to move and perform actions immediately before and after the usage of a tumbler, whereas in other titles, there's a bit of a build-up and a cooldown to the usage of the various different healing items. For the most part, Stellar Blade doesn't have that. Instead, it uses this long animation as the pure time for the usage of the healing items. So in actuality, I feel like the timing's about the same as it is to other games that are similar to this one. And in accordance with this, the enemy design reflects this, and the enemies typically have timing windows where there is an opportunity to heal without taking damage, but it just doesn't feel like it is because the animation's so long. So basically what I'm saying is the animation is longer, but the window for healing opportunities is balanced to reflect this, and the combat system as a whole is very similar to other games like this, even though it may not feel like this at first. It's just something that you have to get used to if you've played similar games like this. But the tumblers are not the only healing items here either. There are 3 more healing items, and you use them as consumables, meaning that they don't regenerate like the tumblers do every time you rest. The first one is a lingering potion. This is just a continuously healing potion, and you initially get 3 of them. The trade-off here with this one is that it's slow, and it initially doesn't heal much at all, and the overall healing of it is less than the tumblers. So if you need to heal immediately, this is not the item to use. These are helpful though if you are running out of tumblers and you just want to top off after a fight without using another tumbler. The next potion is a concentrated potion. This is just basically a weaker tumbler, and again you initially get 3 of them, and they're just a good option when you're running out of tumblers, or if you want to top off after a fight. But again, they're just basically weaker than the regular tumblers. The final healing item is the bionic field generator. Hold on, because this one's a little bit weird. So basically, it's an area of effect item where you throw it down, and it generates a field of healing effects that heals you while you're in that field. So it has very specific usages in battle. Basically, you can use it to go back and forth in while you're healing in combat. That way you don't have to ever use a healing item in the middle of a fight, and you just have to run into the field in order for it to kick in and start healing you. The issue here is it really just doesn't last that long, nor does it heal that much, so it's very limited in its usage. Overall, I feel like these items, with the exception of the tumbler, which I think is great and pretty much perfect, pretty underpowered, but again, the tumbler isn't, so these other items kind of acting as backups to the tumbler, I don't really mind, and maybe that's what they were trying to do with that. But these aren't the only usable items. There are 4 more usable items, and they're basically grenades of some sort. One is a pulse grenade that does only shield damage in a specific area in a pulsatile manner. Another is a shock grenade, which is basically just a stun grenade that knocks the enemy down. And then there's a smart mine, which basically acts like a mine, but again, it only does damage to the shield. And then finally, a sonic grenade, which is a shock grenade that makes enemies fall off balance instead of knocking them over like the shock grenade does. But knocking them off balance allows you to deal more damage, whereas knocking them over stops them from attacking for a significant amount of time. Like the alternative healing items, I find these items to be pretty underpowered as well, with maybe the exception of the shock and the sonic grenade, because they're definitely pretty useful in getting out of bad situations, but really that's the only reason that I would use them. And I barely use the other 2 because they really only do damage to the shield. But speaking of shield damage, along with the standard bar of health, like most other action RPGs, you also get a shield meter. But here in Stellar Blade, the shields aren't a direct addition to the health, but instead it's a damage reducer. So it reduces the amount of incoming damage by a certain percentage based on what gear you have on. What percentage does it reduce the incoming damage by initially? I don't know, you got me. I'm not really sure the game ever tells you either. It just tells you that the shield takes off a certain amount of damage. And certain enemies, actually most enemies, also have their own shield that reduces the amount of incoming damage that you're doing to them. I think each enemy shield is specific to that type of enemy or boss, and in general the shields will regenerate over time. And specifically with bosses, they can do specific commands that restore their shields. Some enemies as well, but mostly bosses. Okay, now we've hit all the main aspects of how the combat system works. And the combat as a whole is super fun, and all the various aspects come together really great to make an overall stellar combat system. But none of this would matter if the enemy design wasn't up to snuff, but thankfully it is. The enemies here in Stellar Blade are wonderful. There's a pretty wide variety of different enemies here, and they pretty much are all great, except for the Hydra. That enemy sucks. But the enemies are diverse and plentiful, and they're also pretty challenging. If you're playing on normal mode, you'll probably find this game relatively challenging, but in a fair way. Not as tough as Dark Souls or anything like that, but still relatively tough. When I die from an enemy getting the best of me, I always feel like I did something wrong to make that happen. Like somehow it was ultimately my fault. And that's the type of difficulty balance that is great in games like these, in my opinion. Each different enemy type also has their own variety of attacks and defense that make it to where you have to learn that specific style of fighting in order to best them, or at least kill them efficiently. They also did a really great job here requiring you to engage with various different mechanics of the game, like parrying, dodging, blinking, and repulsing. Because if you ignore these mechanics, I just don't think you can be successful. But out of all the enemies, the bosses absolutely stand out as the best fights in the game. The bosses here are excellent. We're talking like Dark Souls level of excellence. Maybe not quite as good as that, but pretty dang close. There's 19 bosses in total in the game, and they're all at least good, with a ton of them being exceptional. They're outstanding here in Stellar Blade, and I had so much fun fighting them that I even fought them all over again through the boss rush mode, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. With all the cool and unique mechanics in this game, the great enemy variety and design, and the wonderful bosses, Stellar Blade has to be one of the best action RPGs or Souls-likes to date. In a sentence, the combat and combat systems are stellar, but there's also another aspect of this game that may even be more stellar: the collectibles. This game has some of the best collectibles I've ever seen in any video game. And yes, I'm primarily talking about the outfits. With the 7 extra outfits that they added in the most recent updates, there's a total of 81 outfits in the game. 81. Granted, you only have access to 41 when you do the first playthrough, and you have to do the second playthrough to get the rest, but the second playthrough outfits are the same as the first playthrough outfits, but just in a different color scheme. But the different color schemes are a very much significant change, so it's not like just getting reskin versions of the same thing. They're more like completely different outfits. Or, if you play Pokemon or are familiar with Pokemon, they're more like shiny Pokemon versions of the prior outfits. And I would even say almost all of the alternative outfits, aka the ones in the second playthrough, look even better than the original outfit. For the outfits themselves, I think pretty much all of them look excellent, and they're also pretty significantly different from one another, which is great. I really don't like it when games have different outfits for characters, but they all kind of look similar to one another. But here, that's absolutely not the case. And I think they did a great job. There's definitely some ones that stand out above the rest, but even the ones that I would consider to be at the bottom of the list are still really good. And yeah, they're definitely revealing and provocative to an extent, but I definitely think it could be worse, and I think they struck a good balance between not being too intense, but intense enough to definitely keep it interesting. And we'll talk more about this later on as I elaborate my feelings on the subject. But there's also earrings, glasses, and hairstyles to collect as well. The earrings are pretty cool, and there's a decent amount of variety here with them, but they're not nearly as cool as outfits. The earrings are more subtle, but they do add a lot of customization, which is great. But to the overall package of the customization of Eve, I absolutely like the outfits a lot more. The same can be said for the glasses, well, for the most part anyway. There's a decent amount of them, just like the earrings, and personally, I definitely think they're more noticeable than the earrings, so they kind of look better, but still it's nothing compared to the outfits. The hairstyles, however, are excellent. Like everything else, there's a decent amount of them, which is great, but more importantly, you can also change the color of the hair as well. The hairstyles as a whole are super noticeable for obvious reasons, and they can completely change the look of Eve in her outfits. I really love the hairstyles here in Stellar Blade. The only thing that I wish was a little bit different was that there was a significantly wider variety of different styles and colors. Typically with each different hairstyle, there's about a handful of colors that it comes with, but there's already a good amount here, especially when you compare it to other games of similar quality. You can also collect outfits for Adam and Lily, and like the outfits for Eve, these outfits are great. However, there's not really a lot of them for either character, but what's here is really good, and they significantly change the look of Lily and Adam. You can also equip different shells for the drone, and again, there's not a whole lot of shells here, but they do really change up the look of the drone, so it's a really cool addition to the customization and collectibles. Another great collectible are of course the cans. However, the cans don't really function as the same previous collectibles like the outfits, the earrings, the glasses, and everything like that, but they're actually just collectibles in the game that are tied to reward unlocks, which I think this mechanic is awesome. The rewards are basically just increases in the amount of usable items, like some of the healing potions, some of the grenades and whatnot, which increases the amount that you can hold at any one time. But if you find all of them, you get an exclusive outfit, the Black Pearl Nano Suit, which is definitely one of the more revealing outfits in the game, and honestly is one of the best. I really like the Kansas collectibles, and not necessarily for the rewards, but I do think the rewards are really cool. It just kind of gives you more reason for it, but obviously the outfit was what I was chasing with the collectibles. For a collecting system like the cans, you really could have had anything in place of it, where basically if you collected enough, they would give you a reward, and they didn't need to prioritize the collectible being a can in particular. However, here in Stellar Blade, there's so much personality and zest behind these cans that I found it really fun and exciting trying to look for them and then collect them, of course. Every time you collect a can, Eve does a super over-the-top pose, and there's some cool music behind it, and it's just really over the top. And there's a sweet zoom in with some funny music. It's just really kind of a great gag for the collectibles. There's also various different designs of the cans, and this adds to the animation of collecting them as well. So each can is going to look a little bit different. There's also a vending machine at the main campsite in Zion that displays all of the cans that you've collected so that you can view them at any time. You can learn more about them in the world of the current events of the game, due to the cans kind of being considered a relic of the past. And by having the vending machine there, you can see which cans you don't already have in order to collect them all. I really like the cans in this game as the collectible. I think it's just a great addition. And finally, kind of a collectible, but also kind of the game's main minigame, we have fishing. Fishing is unlocked later on in the game, but it acts as the stable minigame of Stellar Blade, and it's really good. Once unlocked, you gain access to the fishing rod and a few different types of baits that you can use at various different fishing spots to, of course, catch fish. The bait type directly responds to the size of the fish, and the size of the fish are categorized into 5 different groups: small, medium, large, gigantic, and jumbo. As you progress through the game, you unlock more types of baits that give you access to different size of fish. But how does the fishing mechanics work? Once you equip the rod, you can select the bait that you're going to use, you can pull back the rod, and you can cast it out into a fishing spot. There are various different fishing spots throughout the world, and each one of them will have different types of fish in that specific spot. And again, the type of fish is correlated with the size of the fish. So some fishing spots will have small fish and large fish, but they'll also only have specific small fish in that spot and specific large fish in that spot. Therefore, if you want to catch all 25 different fish types, you need to visit most of the spots in the world, if not all of them, and try the different bait types. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so let's go back to the actual mechanic of fishing. So after you cast out the line, you let it sit for a relatively short amount of time, especially if there are fish in that particular spot that prefer the bait that you're using on the line. And then you'll get a fish that takes the bait, and then you're on. When they take the bait, they'll immediately go into either the right or left direction, and you have to pull the opposite side and repeatedly press the square button in order to break the fish stamina and reel them in. And throughout this, they'll go from side to side, and so you have to pay attention to what direction they're going to be at. And during this process, you'll have a time limit that pops up to where you have to catch that fish within that time limit or it breaks the line. And on top of all of this, you have reel-in sections where you have to squeeze the right trigger on the DualSense controller to just the right amount through the adaptive triggers and land it in the appropriate zone displayed on the screen in order to reel in the fish throughout the fishing fight. But when you successfully complete one of these fishing fights, you pull the fish up in an exaggerated animation and you're rewarded with the fish. But fishing is hard. This minigame can get really hard, specifically with the reel-in sections. Landing that adaptive trigger exactly at the right section in order to reel in the fish is super difficult to pull off, especially with the bigger fish that you get access to later on. But there is a section in the options menu that you can turn on that basically makes fishing significantly easier by allowing you to change out the repeated hits of the square button to be replaced with just hitting the square button once when the fish changes from one direction to the next. So if it's going to the left, you have to pull to the right and press the square button once, and then when it changes to the right side, you have to pull to the left side and press the square button again. And then with the reel-in sections, with the adaptive triggers, it'll change it to where you just have to land in the zone once and not hold it there, and then you can let go of it and it'll automatically reel it in. I tried it the normal way for a pretty significant amount of time, but as I was trying to get bigger fish, I absolutely turned this setting on and left it on, and this made my experience with fishing so much better. In fact, I think fishing as a minigame here is really cool, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I like all the different types of fish that you can catch. I like the economy around the fish, which I'll definitely talk about more later on, and specifically the different fishing spots that you can catch these fish in, because some of them are absolutely stunning. But speaking of that, the soundtrack and visuals. I'm gonna start off with the visuals because, oh my goodness, does this game look good. This is by far one of the best looking games on PS5. The graphics here are stunning, but there's also somewhat of an issue too here with the graphics. I don't know if the game is bugged or if it's my specific game or what exactly is going on, but the game only looks good on the balanced mode. So for the graphics, there's 3 different modes. There's the graphics mode, the performance mode, and then the balanced mode. Theoretically, the graphics mode is supposed to stabilize the 4K resolution at 30 frames a second with a locked 30 frames a second, and the performance mode dips down to 1080p with a locked 60 frames a second. And the balanced mode is supposed to be at 2K resolution with 60 frames per second being locked and 4K upscaling. The issue here is that something's wrong with the graphics mode. It seems as if the frame rate drops far below 30 and it's super noticeable, and the balance mode is supposed to be at 2K with a targeted 60 frames per second and a 4K upscaling. The issue here is that there's something wrong with the graphics mode. It seems as if the frame rate drops way below 30 and it's super noticeable, like to almost a sickening level and unplayable. So really the only way to play this game is on balance mode because it targets 60 frames. And for the most part, I think it hits 60 frames. Performance mode is locked at 60, whereas the balance mode can dip to like 45 to 50 frames at times. However, it's hardly noticeable. So to me, the balance mode is the only way to go because it's essentially the same frame rate with twice the graphical power, and then almost 4K resolution too when it upscales. And of course, the graphics mode seems to be broken, so that's really not an option for me either. But even in balance mode, this game looks incredible. And on top of all this, the art design is wonderful as well. This game kind of looks like a mixed match of a lot of different things put together, and some people think that there are too many things that don't fit into the world that are here, but I don't really feel that way at all. But I can see where these people are coming from. I don't necessarily feel the way these people do, because I think the mixing and matching of various different styles is exactly what the world of Stellar Blade is. I think that that's its identity. But let's talk more specifics. So the main characters here are all wonderfully designed, and they all look different from one another, which I really love. Eve, of course, is the standout, but I also really like Adam and Lily's design too. A lot of the designs reflect the outfits that they have at any one point in time, but in general, the look of each character really fits the world well, and they just look good. Eve obviously is the more emphasized character, but in a good way. But there are definitely some characters in the game that almost have a completely different style that extremely stand out for me. One in particular is Kaya, the merchant from the Sisters Junk Shop, which is like one of the main vendors in the hub world. She's very much more anime than anyone else in this game, honestly, and I love her look. Because of this look, some people would say that she looks out of place here, and I get that, but she looks really good, so I don't really care or truly think that's the case here, but I get it, I understand. Another character that's done really well as far as design is, of course, the Oracle. He's super cyberpunky and looks like what I would imagine a tech Oracle to look like. However, I will agree with the masses and say that the hair designer is a bit out of touch in regards of his design. But at the same time, I think that's just how this world is. It's a mixed match of various different ideas all thrown together into one. And because of that, I really like the world. But of course, the beings that stand out the most are the naytibas, who look otherworldly compared to anything else in this game, which I think is a good thing because it adds to the mystery surrounding of what the true nature of them actually is. But as far as each one's individual design, I think it's immaculate. They're kind of scary and gross while also being menacing, and thus act as a great enemy throughout the game. And again, I think their designs are pretty diverse, which is also wonderful. But they all fit kind of the same theme, so there's a cohesion in a sense, but you can obviously tell one type from the next. Their designs are great. The levels are also really beautiful, although most of them will be in desert-like areas, so some of them will kind of feel samey after a while. But even with those areas, they look great. However, some of the linear levels, especially later on in the game, really offer significantly more diverse locales, and the final area is just stunning. The soundtrack here is also magnificent, and here again, I think there's a wide variety of different tracks, and they're all pretty great. The soundtrack here is heavily inspired by the Nier soundtrack, and some of the tracks sound like they could have come straight out of Nier, but that's because one of the main composers of the Nier franchise composed a large portion of the tracks here in Stellar Blade 2, which I think was a really smart move on Shift Up's part. The composers here, all of them, did a wonderful job, and I love the music of Stellar Blade. There's a ton of great tracks, and it's absolutely one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. I know I say that about everything, but this is a really, really, really good soundtrack. Leveling and progression. I really like the leveling system here in Stellar Blade. The way that it works here is basically that you gain experience through battle and completing quests, and also by finding deceased adventurers or finding lore dumps spread throughout the world. But once you gain enough experience, you gain a skill point, which then can be used on the various different skill trees that you have available to you. You start off with attack, survival, and the beta skill tree, all of which affect their corresponding names, with 2 more being unlocked as you progress through the game. The trees are pretty expansive, and they all have very useful upgrades that primarily affect combat, and they honestly improve the experience of the game as a whole. But it is kind of designed in such a way that you really should fully upgrade a branch once you start going down it, because of how impactful some of the upgrades are and how they can improve your experience in combat especially. However, there are a ton of great skills throughout the tree, so it may be more advisable to get a variety of different skills through various different branches if that's how you like to play. I love the skill trees here, and I think a ton of skills are super useful throughout combat. You increase your health by finding body cores that are spread throughout the world. You need 3 in total to increase your overall HP the next level, which when this happens, it's always a significant increase in HP. It's not just like a little bump, it's a pretty significant chunk. Therefore, this further encourages you to explore in order to find these cores. And pretty much the same system applies to the amount of beta energy that you can have, but instead of body cores, you find 3 beta cores, and again, it significantly increases the amount of beta energy that you have. Both of these are pretty simple systems of leveling up that have definitely been used in other titles, but I do like them here a lot. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Speaking of that, the weapon, tumbler, and exospine upgrading are probably the most simplest upgrading systems in the game, but they're all pretty solid in my opinion. Basically, you collect enough corresponding materials that you need to upgrade either the weapon, tumbler, or exospine, and you just upgrade it. In order to continuing upgrading after you've upgraded a little bit, typically increases, so you'll need more of that respective item that's tied to a specific upgrade. The drone is kind of a mix of the 2 different leveling systems that I previously talked about, so it's not just like the weapons where it's a straight upgrade, but it's also not just like the regular skill tree either. But in general, there is a drone skill tree, but it's basically just straight linear branches that go down from the different types of ammo that you have available to you in the drone. In order to upgrade the drone, however, you need to collect drone upgrade modules that are spread throughout the world, or you have the ability to craft them, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. As you progress through a branch, of course it gets better and better with upgrades, so overall I'd have to say the drone upgrading system, while simplistic but a little bit more complex than the weapons and the tumbler and the exospines, is pretty decent. It works well here. Now going back to the crafting thing for a little bit, one of the main things that I like most with the leveling system here, and really the progression in the game overall, is how the economy works into it. The main thing with the economy of the game here is that various different items that you get throughout the game all pretty much have a very specific use, and you can probably get a lot of them, especially if you're grinding out for various different parts. However, if you have an excess of any one item, there's typically a way to trade it in for something else that you may need that may be more useful to you. So let me explain. A great example of this is the drone module upgrades. The crafting that I mentioned earlier is really just buying them from a vendor, but you need certain other items that are dropped from mechanical type naytibas, 3 in particular, in order to craft these drone module upgrades. But these 3 different items are also needed to upgrade the exospines. So if you're trying to upgrade some exospines and you continue farming the various different materials needed to upgrade them, or you just find that you have too much of them, you can trade those in for a drone module upgrade. Another great example of this is fishing. When you catch a fish, you get a fish score that's based off the type of fish that you caught, and basically the score will be higher or lower based on the size of the fish and how difficult it was to catch the fish. These points act like currency, and you can take them to the main fishing vendor and then buy a variety of different items. They're mainly geared towards different types of bait or module upgrades that allow for Eve to catch bigger fish and also unlock better bait to catch the bigger fish. However, this vendor also sells materials that you can use to upgrade the exospines, along with Bitcoins, which are used to buy outfits, along with some other massive healing items. So if you don't need any more bait, which will happen if you unlock the final bait, then you can use your fishing score to buy some of these items. But that's not all. You can also take the fish that you've caught to a butcher in the hub world and sell them for money. So if you unlock all the fish and you exclusively fish for the biggest fish, with the final bait that doesn't use up any bait, basically can constantly be used, and you gain a ton of fishing points, you can buy a ton of Bitcoins and materials needed to upgrade the exospines, and either level up the exospines or trade them in for drone modules, and then sell the fish to the butcher for more money. Then you can use the money to go to another vendor in the hub world to buy material for crafting outfits. So now you've got the coins to buy the outfits, and you can buy the material to craft them. And this is just one example. This cohesion of various different systems all working together was so much fun to get into and kind of figuring out. I legit spent a ton of time messing with this in order to max out all of my exospines, primarily to get the trophy, and to max out the upgrades on the drone as much as I could at that time. And of course, unlocking all the outfits. And I went even further with this, and I bought a ton of Bitcoins and a boatload of material for unlocking the outfits, so that when I started my second playthrough, I could kind of speed run it and kind of get all the extra outfits that are in the second playthrough. And I had a ton of fun doing it because the fishing is also excellent, and I love how all the economic paths all come together, and it was just excellent. But you know what else is excellent? The side quests and New Game Plus. There's a ton of side quests in this game, and they're all pretty okay. There's nothing really outstanding or anything like that, but there's some solid content to get into here. The majority of the side quests will more than likely come from the quest board, which is available in the hub world. In order to begin the quest, you'll have to actually go to the board and accept the quest. However, you can also run into quests by talking to various different NPCs as you pass them. Again, the quests really aren't anything special per se, but they do have some really good rewards that kind of make them worth it. For the most part, they're either fetch quests, or they're the type of quests where you go to a certain area and kill a specific amount of enemies or something to that nature. But there are some quests that are definitely more involved, and that may even lead to a boss fight, which is really cool. And what's also cool is that when you're done with the quest, whether it's fetch certain items or kill certain enemies or whatever, you get a prompt on the screen that allows you to immediately teleport either back to the quest board or to the NPC that gave out that quest in order to complete the quest, so you don't have to backtrack all the way to where the quest came from. This is such a high quality of life mechanic, and it's definitely much appreciated here. I did almost all the side quests, and I probably wouldn't have if I had to constantly go back and forth. So overall, I'd say the side quests were pretty decent. New Game Plus, however, is excellent. When you beat the game, you can play through it again in New Game Plus mode, where you carry over pretty much everything, where you gain access to a new difficulty level, Hard Mode, which definitely increases the challenge. But it's also a ton of fun. For the most part, I do think hard mode is just basically increasing the enemy's health and attack power, which typically I don't really like in games because I feel like it's kind of lazy. However, here in Stellar Blade, I think that there's so many mechanics that can be put into play at any one point in time that it kind of forces you to engage with all the various different mechanics of the game and be efficient with some of the things that maybe you weren't efficient with on the first playthrough. So in that sense, I really like it. But most importantly, they added 2 new exclusive outfits to the New Game Plus playthrough and 32 different colored versions of pre-existing outfits. And for most, all the new color flips of the pre-existing outfits look better than the original outfit. They also added additional drone skins and outfits for Adam and Lily, and these are definitely some of the best outfits in the game for both characters and the drone. So if you enjoyed getting all the outfits the first time around, I really think you're going to enjoy getting them the second time through with all the cool alternative outfits and colors. I also just wanted to bring up the fact that they added another vendor that's specifically for New Game Plus, which allows you to exchange duplicate items or items that you can't really use anymore for other items that are useful to you. So again, the economy is working really well with this new vendor. Just super cool. If you decided to go into New Game Plus and you didn't max out your tumbler expansions, weapon upgrades, drone module upgrades, skills in the skill tree, etc., you can keep upgrading these in New Game Plus. However, there's also new skills that are added to the skill tree in New Game Plus that are basically just super versions of whatever branch the upgrade's actually in. And once you fully upgrade the tumbler slots, the health, the beta energy, the weapon, etc., you can go even further beyond in New Game Plus. For the tumbler upgrades in the New Game Plus, once you get all 8 tumbler slots filled, you can't add more tumblers, but you can still upgrade them by several levels, 6 in total, and increase the effectiveness of the tumblers. So basically each tumbler will heal more health per use. For Eve's health, you actually can increase it an additional 3 times in New Game Plus. So in the first playthrough, you can increase Eve's health 6 times, but now in New Game Plus, you can increase it a total of 9 times. The amount of beta energy also works like this, and really the exact same way, so it goes from 6 to 9 times in total. The weapon, however, is a little different. You can increase the weapon level to 15 in the base game, and each level jump corresponds with a significant increase in the attack power. But once you hit level 15, even in New Game Plus, you can keep leveling up Eve's blade all the way up to level 40. But from level 15 to level 40, the damage only slightly increases every time it levels up. So it's not nearly as much of a jump as it was between 1 to 15, but there's a lot of levels that it can increase, and it is something, I guess. And finally, let's mention the boss rush mode. This mode's unlocked after beating the game, and it's really cool and super fun. There's really not much to it. It's just fighting one boss after the next, but it's not continuous, and you can't really make it continuous, which is a bit of a shame, but it's still really cool and fun. And of course, there's new exclusive outfits tied to completing the boss rush mode on either normal or hard difficulty, and they just added another outfit that you get from beating the second to last boss on the hard difficulty in the boss rush mode. This was a total blast to play through, and it's such a cool mode to add here. I really love what they're doing. The story and sequel? Spoilers. Okay, so I'm not going to go into every major story point here in Stellar Blade as I do in most other videos that I have on topics like this, which you should really check out, by the way, if you haven't already. Partially because this video is already going to be long, but I also don't have a lot to say about the story beats except for specific sections. But in these sections, I actually have a lot to say. But I will be spoiling the story, so if you want that first-hand experience of the story, then skip to this time step now, or click off the video, maybe come back to it later after you play the game. Okay, so the story here isn't the best, but it really could have been. Let me explain. There's so much potential here in the world of Stellar Blade, and I think for the most part, it just goes to waste. The main issue here really isn't the plot or the story as a whole, but more how it's told, and maybe the script, and a bit of the voice acting too. So let's talk about how exactly the story is told first. In the beginning of the game, you're kind of just thrown into the world. There's not a whole lot of explanation going on, and it's just kind of confusing. Which this definitely can work if things are explained as the game goes on. I think Nier Automata does this pretty much perfectly. But here in Stellar Blade, there's a ton of stuff that's just either isn't explained or just really not explained very well at all. For example, I had no idea what the angels actually were, which is what Eve is. I didn't really know what differentiates them from other people fighting the naytibas. And actually, from the beginning, I thought that Eve was an android, and that's how it was meant to be portrayed to us. One of the big quote-unquote shocking twists of the game is that Eve finds out that she's actually an android. So like during this big twist, I was pretty confused because I already thought that she was an android. So I sat back and I said, wait a minute, she's supposed to be a human? And she's not an android? And then when they revealed that pretty much everybody's an android, I kind of stepped back and looked at some of the character designs and how everybody interacted with one another, and was kind of shocked because I thought they were clearly all androids. But no, they're supposed to be humans, and the twist is that they're actually androids. To me, I think it's pretty obvious what they really were, but that's not what you're supposed to think, I guess. I don't know. So, if the story would have been unfolded in a way that really tried to portray Eve and everybody else as like bio-enhanced humans, like basically modified and designed to survive the onslaught of the naytibas instead of actual being androids, and really push that narrative, I think the twist would have been much more impactful and would have been a really good plot device. Still, it'd be a little bit predictable, but it would have been much better than what we got. And if you look at the lore dumps spread throughout the game, they leave a ton of hints that these people are actually androids. And they leave a ton of hints as to what the actual naytibas' origins are. So for the naytibas as a whole, I think the concept is really cool. But as soon as I found out that they were called naytibas, and that originally they were going to be called natives, yeah, that just gave it away pretty much. I knew that they were the original human species that somehow turned into this. And this was absolutely reinforced by my assumption that Eve was an android. I personally think that they should have completely steered away from the name naytibas or natives or anything related to that. If they would have really shrouded the identity of the naytibas and almost gave no information about their background, save for only like a few obscure pieces of lore hidden throughout the world, and really push the narrative that everybody is just bio-enhanced people and not androids, I think the reveal of what Eve actually is and what the naytibas actually are would have been really, really cool. And actually, I think that Elden Ring does this perfectly with the origins of Radagon, which I won't hop into that, I won't spoil it, but if you know, you know. So it is possible to do this well. And finally, let's talk about the main ending twist, where we have Adam being the Elder Naytiba. Now this is the best twist in the game by far, and I didn't really see it coming. Until, of course, Adam leaves the party in the final mission and starts acting very strange. As soon as he did this, it was a dead giveaway. But really, if they wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have seen it coming, and it would have been a great twist. I also want to talk about the end for a second, because I think this is absolutely the best part of the story. And it also shows what Stellar Blade could have been. For the ending, there's a whole new area that you go to, and it's the best level of the game by far. It's a linear level, but it's really tight. It has a good amount of bosses that are evenly paced throughout it, and it has a wide variety of different locales. And of course, the bosses here are the best bosses in the game, hands down. The level design and the art design in the last mission is magnificent. It's the best looking area in the game, and there's kind of a wide variety of various different environments that you go to throughout this level that are significantly different from any other environment in the game. This final mission's excellent. But when you get to the end of the last area, you find Adam, and he reveals to Eve that he is indeed the Elder Naytiba, which is basically like the big bad of all the Naytibas. He's the original Naytiba, and if they want to stop the Naytibas, they need to kill him. And Adam as a whole has been right alongside Eve the entire time, helping her out and everything, so it's kind of a big twist if you didn't see it coming. But instead of fighting her right away, he offers her a choice. She can fuse with him and become a being that can unite the Naytibas and the androids, or she can just walk away, or she can choose to kill him and complete her mission. That mission, of course, is the mission that was assigned by Mother Sphere to wipe out the Naytibas. But wait a minute. What's Mother Sphere? Throughout the game, Mother Sphere is brought up, but it's not really elaborated on much at all. It's basically just supposed to be this essentially godlike creature that helped enhance the modern humans quote unquote, that are actually androids. However, what it actually is that it's an AI entity that's gone wrong and that's created this whole android race. Basically, it wanted to create a better human species and wipe out the original humans. So it made the androids, and the androids were designed to replace the humans. Back when this all started, the humans couldn't stand up to the androids much at all, so they started experimenting with their own genes to create a super soldier, basically, which is what Adam is as the first Naytiba. But for pretty much everybody else, it kind of went a bit wrong, with the exception of like the Oracle, who's also a Naytiba, and some other people like Raven, where that experiment actually worked. But everyone else turned into the Naytibas, the creature-like things, and they're basically like zombies at this point. So here at the end, Adam gives Eve this choice, and what you choose as Eve will lead into a specific ending to the game, which there are 3 of total, which I'll talk about here in a second. But the issue here is that Adam lays everything out on the line and explains everything in these last few minutes. He explains how the Naytibas came to be, what Mother Sphere really is, that's actually explained a little bit earlier, but he further elaborates on it, why he hid his identity, why he saved Eve in the first place, and what he really wants from all this. And what he wants is to unite everybody, to stop the endless violence. And through his actions throughout the game, and even at this moment, he seems very genuine. And to even further the authenticity of him, he gives you the choice to help him with his mission or refuse him, and he supports either choice that you make. So if you fuse with him, theoretically you can unite the 2 races and everybody can live in peace, but that's if you believe him. If you don't believe him, you can choose to kill him and complete your mission that was given to you by Mother Sphere. But the question here is, can you trust Mother Sphere? Either choice that you take is going to lead to a boss fight, so both choices are good from a gameplay standpoint, but which one's morally right? For me, I didn't really want to do this, but I thought that morally killing Adam would be the best for the first ending, and I was totally wrong. Once you pick this option, Adam explains to you that in order to get the Alpha Core, he has to turn into the Elder Naytiba, which he loses control, and the Elder Naytiba fights you. This also furthers his genuineness and his authenticity as kind of being a good guy. And this boss fight's also super cool and pretty challenging. It's definitely one of the best boss fights in the game, and I really enjoyed fighting him. However, once you defeat him and take his Elder Core, you're then greeted by Mother Sphere as you're exiting the premises, who's represented by this little girl, and she explains to Eve that her mission has been completed, and now it's time for her and Lily to return to the colony, which is basically the home station for the angels and the model androids. So this initially sounds like a good thing, but the atmosphere around this really plays into the sense that Eve, well, up. When you enter space with Mother Sphere, there's a very dramatic zoom in that shows the entirety of the colony and how it surrounds the Earth in a very cryptic way. Before that, you also see Eve and Lily looking at one another as they witness the colony and what it actually is. You can tell that they really know that they kind of messed up, and this is essentially the bad ending. I really like the subversion of expectations here, and I like how you get the feeling that you really messed up by making this choice of killing Adam. And for a bad ending, this was a really good bad ending, I think. And I think they really nailed the tone, and they did an excellent job here. But after I got this ending, I went back and saw that I could reload the last save and get another ending from that save. And the next ending that I got was the good ending, where I choose to fuse with Adam and save Lily. Now for this ending in particular, you have to complete Lily's progression bar, which is displayed as a percentage progression bar every time that you find a body or a lore piece that gives you more information about the world. And that's the playing with the theme that Lily is interested in the world and wants to find out more about. Once you get to 100%, you gain access to a hidden linear level that takes place right before you hit the final level. And this is like a full-size level. It's a pretty big level too. It's really, really cool. And I like how they kind of hid it behind this, so you could completely miss this area. But if you go to this new area, you go all the way to the end, and then you go on to the final level, you will then save Lily in the final fight. Basically, for the final level, Lily joins you in a mech suit, and if you fuse with Adam, the suit goes haywire and starts to fight you with Lily trapped inside. But if you went to the secret level, you get a specific item that allows you to save Lily, because otherwise Lily gets killed by the mech. And of course, I went to the extra level, so I automatically got this ending. But the mech fight is also awesome. It's a great, challenging fight, and I really enjoyed it as well. But after you beat the mech, Mother Sphere comes to congratulate you on defeating her, and then basically basically wages war on Eve and sends down a barrage of androids to kill her, through which you gain control of Eve again, and then you start taking out the androids in an epic showdown as the screen fades to black after a few minutes of fighting them. There's a final cutscene that shows Eve and Lily going back to Zion and restoring the city to its former glory with all the needed alpha cores. And now seemingly the next step for Eve and the crew is to take down Mother Sphere. Again, this is of course the good ending, and I think they really nailed it here. It's kind of what you would expect from the good ending, but having the androids come down and then fighting them until the screen fades to black, it's just a super cool last cutscene. And then at the very end, seeing that Zion was restored is really cool and optimistic, and I think sets up a potential sequel excellently. However, there's another ending, and that's the really bad ending. The third ending is where you fuse with Adam and Lily dies, and this happens when you don't complete Lily's progression bar. So in this ending, everything from the good ending plays out the same basically until the mech goes haywire, and then it delivers a blow to Lily that ultimately kills her. And then after beating the mech, Eve holds Lily in her arms as she dies and says her final goodbyes. And for a really bad ending, I think they did a great job with this. It's really pretty sad and done extremely well. But after you leave the premises, after beating the mech, Mother Sphere comes down again to greet Eve, just like all the other endings, but it's pretty significantly different because Lily's dead and Eve's obviously extremely angry about this. And again, the androids come down, but the atmosphere and the tone is completely different. The color of the sky is different. It's more of a reddish shade to kind of reflect the pain and sorrow and kind of the revenge take that Eve's trying to get at Mother Sphere. And I think it's excellent. But now Eve is embarking on a trail of revenge in order to destroy Mother Sphere. This ending's totally different tonally, and again, it's really pretty sad, but I think they nailed it. And I think these endings really show what the story could have been if the quality of the rest of the story would have been at the same level as these endings were. But nonetheless, I'm at least glad that they stuck the landings. I need a sequel to this game. It was a super fun experience, and I'm legitimately interested in the world more. And now the two main characters, Eve and Lily, I need them in a sequel. For a sequel, I'd obviously want it to follow the good ending where Lily lives and Eve and Adam fuse. And I would want it to be about embarking on a journey to take down the Mother Sphere, but most importantly, I would want it to take on more of its own identity. This game obviously is heavily inspired by Nier Automata from the story beats, which is great as a premise, but I think that it stuck to it too tightly, and it didn't branch off nearly enough until the very end of the story. And then here at the end, it did branch out pretty significantly and it was wonderful, but I just wish it was like that the entire time. I'm fairly certain Shift Up has tentatively said that they're going to make a sequel to this, and if they do, I hope they improve the script, the voice acting as a whole, and diverge a little bit more from the Nier inspiration, and maybe innovate a little bit on the mechanics of the game as well. If this is all done, I think that maybe the next game may be a modern masterpiece, and I can't wait. Conclusion. Stellar Blade was a magnificent journey, and I really enjoyed it, and it was such a breath of fresh air. The combat, enemies, and boss fights, along with the world and lore, visual soundtrack, and the collectibles were all top tier. The traversal, the story, the writing, and the voice acting, however, were definitely lackluster, but everything around the story dramatically improves in the final hours of the game, and I genuinely was impressed. But the main thing with Stellar Blade is that it's fresh and fun. There's a ton of reasons to come back to it and keep playing it once you beat it in order to get all the collectibles or play through it again in a harder difficulty or do the boss rush mode, etc. And I think that the first playthrough was also excellent. I had so much fun with this game that I started a New Game Plus playthrough in order to experience it all again, get all the collectibles, try it out at a harder difficulty, and I'm even strongly considering platinuming the game. But we'll see, and I may do another video for that too. So stay tuned and let me know if you want something like that. But in short, Stellar Blade is absolutely worth playing, and it's one of the best games of the year. If you liked the video and you want to see more like this, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit the bell notification. That way you don't miss out on any future videos. And leave a comment. Tell me what you thought about the video and what you'd like to see me do next. Again, thank you all for the support. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I love seeing what you think about the video or your opinions on the game in the comments. Also, if you want to help support the channel further, consider becoming a member, get some extra loyalty badges, emojis for comments, and a shout out in my next video. But until then, I wish you all the very best, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye bye!